this sort of binary pair. And then what essentially happens is that we said in Gan Eden, when they were still childlike, we'll say, for lack of a better term, and naive and vulnerable. So they didn't really understand their differences. But once they had that dat tovara, all of a sudden there was, as we mentioned, there was shame. All of a sudden there was awareness that they're different from the other. All of a sudden there was a covering up of that which makes them different. But there was also, and we mentioned this, there was also the ability to work together, right? There was an ability to do pru urvu milu et haaretz v'kivshuha. Okay, so that's the first thing that we learned about the other. And we said that one of the outcomes of that reality, and we're going to go back inside and we're going to look at a couple of those details now, is that there was also tension introduced into the relationships, right? I said last week, it's very important that we're not using the word sin, and we're not using the word punishment right now, but what we're using is the word arur, in the sense that not so much that God is angry and so he's cursing people, but more in the sense we spoke about last week, that the human condition that we understand is complicated and is painful and has all sorts of different elements associated with it, both the good and the bad. It's something that's an outcome of that reality where there is tovara. Okay, so look inside just for 1 second to Perek Gimel, if everyone can open up just for 1 second. Okay, and what we have in Perek Gimel is as follows. We have the Hashem essentially telling humanity, okay, if you think about it, actually, one of the things that broke down, or one of the things that was most affected by this blame game that we looked at, is that each relationship is now going to have tension introduced into that relationship, okay? So it may even be easier, I'm going to actually share a screen where it lists all of the, just show for one, hold on, Matan to see. If there's anyone from the Matan office listening, you can give me permission to share a screen, please. Thank you. I'm sure they will respond in 1 second. In just a moment, in the meantime, you can open up your Tanakh to look at it. But one of the things that we notice is that we said last week there was a blame game, right? Hashem says to Adam, why'd you eat from the tree? And he says, no, the woman gave it to me. And then the woman says, no, the snake tricked me into it. And then the snake, right? There was this like sort of blame game. And the result of each blame game is that there was an aspect of the relationship where tension was then introduced. Okay, let me just see if they're giving me permission yet to share. No, not yet. Okay. We'll look inside in the meantime, and then as soon as I'm able to share the screen, I'll share it. Okay. It says as follows. Hashem says, okay, pasuk. We're going to start with pasuk. We're going to start with pasuk Yudalid. Hashem says as follows. Vayomer min Perek Gimel. Vayomer Hashem Elokim El Hanachash, Ki asita zot, right? Because you did this, arur ata mikol habeima, mikol chayat hasadeh, al gechoncha telech ve'afar tuchal kol yemei chayecha. So the first phase of each of these arurim that we're looking at, is that the essence of the being was changed. The Nachash is now from here on in going to be the lowliest of the animal kingdom, right? But then the next aspect is that the relationship between that creation or that being and the being with which it interacted is also now going to be full of tension and animosity and enmity. So then Pasuk Tetvav says, Ve'eva ashit beincha uvein ha'isha uvein zaracha uvein zara. It's not just that you're going to be the lowest on the totem pole. Humanity is going to hate you and you're going to hate them. You're going to try to bite his ankle and he's going to try to stamp on your head. So the essence of that creation was affected, as was the relationship with the beings with which it interacted. Okay, we see it, for example, also with the Isha. Right? She's going to have pain in childbirth, which is the essence of the female as she's understood in Breshit. And then it goes on, which we're going to get back to actually in a couple of minutes. But the relationship, the dynamic between male and female has shifted. And Yud Zayin also, Ula Adam Amar, Ki shamata lekol ishtecha b'tochal min ha'etz asher tziviticha lemor lo tochal mimenu, arura ha'adama ba'avurecha, the essence of man, whose job it was to work the earth, is that his job is now going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to come easily. And the land is not going to just give to you gladly with an open hand. The land itself is going to be full of thorns and full of thistles and full of all the things that are going to make it hard for you to work it. Right? The dynamic between humanity and the land has shifted as well. And therefore, you're going to have to buy the sweat of your brow. Okay. So on the one hand, right, it's almost as if to say, on the one hand, there's this compatibility that's introduced between male and female and humanity and the animal kingdom and the ground and humanity. And at the same time, the reality outside of Gan Eden is that there's also the potential now for that enmity, for the tensions to exist between all those different facets of creation. Okay. That's what we saw at the end of the last parak. If we go, though, to parak Daled, we see another type, another model of the other introduced. Okay, it's not just the compatibility between male and female that we saw. We see something else. Everyone open up to parak Daled, and it says as follows. Adam yada et Chava ishto, vatahar vateled et Kayin. Datomer kaniti ish et Hashem. She has the first child. Now, again, Kayin and Hevel, it's almost tempting to think of them as, right, as two people, as two boys, and Kayin and Hevel, and the two boys that we're going to picture. But Kayin and Hevel are essentially the prototype brothers. They're the prototype second generation. Okay, and what we learn about them is as follows. It says, Vatosef pasuk bet, Vatosef laledet et achiv et Havel, vayhi Hevel roet tzon, Kayin haya oved adama. So take yourselves off mute by all means and tell me what's the very first thing we learn about this idea of other when it comes to just humanity, right, sort of proliferating on Earth. What do we learn about them? What do we learn? She has two sons. One is
taking over Adam's role.
Okay, excellent. And the other?
And the other, well, they can't eat meat yet, so
Right.
So I don't know what the purpose is, what he has in mind when he's.
So he's a shepherd, right? They could still use the milk and the cheese and the wool and everything else that we, right? All the other things we get from animals without having to necessarily eat their meat, right? So what we're seeing from the beginning is that there are two separate vocations. You have the person that's working the earth and the person that's working with the animals, okay? And then something comes up and it says as follows. And again, I'm going to ask you to do what I always ask you to do, which is take your heads, everything we think we know about Cain and Hevel, remove it right now. Okay, because everything we know because we know the ending of the story. Right now, all we have are two boys that chose separate vocations. One adopted the vocation of his father, one went off in a different way to sort of complement, right? That which his brother was the role which his brother was already fulfilling. And it says as follows, Pasuk Gimel. Vayhi miketz yamim, vayavei Kayin mipri ha'adama mincha laHashem. Okay. Now, what do we know and what don't we know? What don't we know? Let's start with that.
Why he did it.
Right. What's the impetus? Right. Why does he bring a mincha? Okay. We don't know. All we know so far is that he brings mipri ha'adama mincha laHashem. We're going to look in 2 seconds, perhaps, why he brought it. Right, but then we also find out the Hevel hevi gam hu mibchorot zono mechel vehen. Okay, and then Hevel sort of copies or mimics that which Cain did. Now, is there any hint in the pasuk as to why Cain might have brought a mincha? What's the only thing it says before he brings the mincha?
Miketz yamim.
Right. What does it mean? Vayhi miketz yamim. Where's the word
When it's the
miketz?
harvest. Maybe when it's harvest time.
So in general in Tanakh, what does the words Vayhi miketz imply? Or when is Vayhi miketz used in Tanakh?
The end of a period.
Right, the end of a specific period, and it's almost usually sort of from the perspective of the person who's waiting for a sign that the period has come to an end. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples. And if I'm moving too quickly, you could just listen. I brought specifically examples that are familiar to everyone. So even if you don't have the page, you could just listen along. Okay, the first one is from Bereshit Perek Chet. Okay, chapter 8, verse 6. And we know that Noach was told that he has to go into his teva for a specific amount of time, and that afterwards he's going to come out again. So in Pasuk Vav there in chapter 8, it says, Vayhi miketz arba'im yom Vayiftach Noach et chalon hateva asher asa. Right, so there's a sense that Noach was waiting for the specific time period to come to an end, and he opens up the door of the he opens up the where was I? Sorry, he opens up the window of the teva that he had made. Okay, we have another example of this in Perek Tet Zayin in Breshit. Okay, and it says as follows: chapter 16 in Breshit, pasuk Gimel, verse 3. ותיקח שרי אשת אברהם את הגר המצרית שפחתה מקץ 10 שנים לשבט אברהם בארץ כנען. ותיתן אותה לאברהם אישה לא לאישה. Okay, so it says מקץ 10 שנים, after 10 years of Sarah waiting, right? Or we have to imagine, right? It doesn't, 10 years is the amount of time that Abraham, it tells us, was in Canaan. So what we have to imagine for ourselves is that regardless of how long they've been married, Sarah gave herself a time frame, right? Or she spoke about it with Abraham and she said, if I'm not pregnant by 10 years in, then we're going to have to come up with something else. And Vayihi Miketz Eser Shanim, right? Miketz Eser Shanim shows us that the reason that all of a sudden one morning she woke up and decided to give Hagar to Abraham, it wasn't all of a sudden one morning. It was they had hit that end of that phase of her waiting. Okay. I'm not going to read all of the examples, but we have this also in Shmot, right, in Perek Yud Bet, when it talks about the Miketz of Bnei Israel's 430 years of slavery. And it talks about it a little bit also with Avshalom in Perek Tet Vav, when Avshalom waits a specific amount of time before he wants to get back to Yerushalayim, or excuse me, before he revolts against David. Okay, so Miketz is from the perspective of a person. It's not just an objective temporal indicator. It's a person waiting, perceiving the significance of that time, what they think will end when they get to a certain time. Okay. Now, we don't know a lot about Cain. The only thing we know about him is he is the oldest son of Adam and Chava, and that he took on the vocation of his father, which meant he was an Oved Adamah. And then we learn by he Miketz, right, Yamim, that after a certain amount of time of him seemingly waiting, he brings a mincha laHashem. So what's the only thing we could even try to perhaps surmise? And it's not just Vayhi Miketz, it's Vayhi Miketz Yamim. What did Hashem say to Adam when he gave him the curse? Kol Yimei Chayecha, right? There was a sense that it almost perhaps seemed like there was a certain amount of time. And then what was Cain waiting for? And if you want to look in Perek Hey, in the very next chapter, Noach's father perhaps gives us a hint as to what possibly Cain was waiting for. Look in the next chapter, chapter 5, verse 29. We're given the etymology for Noach's name. And it says in Pasuk Chavtet, Vayikra et shmo Noach lemor, Zayinachamenu mima'asenu u'meitzvon yadenu min ha'adama asher ibrira Hashem. What does his father give us the sense that perhaps humanity might have been waiting for in the days of Cain and was still waiting for in the days of Noach? What was humanity perhaps hoping for?
Could it be that he was waiting to see if he would get a crop, and he was getting the thistles and everything that was cursed with, and he was waiting till he got a decent produce?
Correct. Or he was waiting, right? I'll speak more broadly, right? He was waiting for the curse to end, right? He was waiting for a lightening of the curse. It was really hard. Working the ground was really, really hard for Cain. And so
El, could it be that they were waiting for Adam dying? That would be the end of the curse?
So it's very possible that's what he thought, right? Because it says Kol Yimei Chayecha. So instead of seeing his father as the paradigm, he saw it as a specific curse, maybe to Adam, right? Mm-hmm. But again, what's important is, and I'm sort of building to how we're going to understand the continuation of the Perek, is that for whatever reason, and again, we don't know, right? Was he bringing the mincha as a request for mercy, as a request for forgiveness? We don't know, right? All we know is that on some level, something about the curse was weighing on Cain. Something about the curse was a lot. It was a lot for him to bear. So he brings a mincha to Hashem. Okay. Now we have something that happens in the next pasuk. The Hevel, Hevi Gamahu, and again, Very important. Oh, actually, I'll get to that in 2 seconds. והבל יביא גם הוא מבכורות צאנו, ומחל ויהן, וישע השם אל הבל ואל מנחתו, ואל קין ואל מנחתו לא שעה, ויחר לקין מאוד ויפלו פניו. Okay, what don't we know? And this is where we have to take all the midrashim where Chazal try to fill in those ellipses and try to come up with explanations. It doesn't mean that those are not important explanations. But for us today, what's important is that what? What's important for us and for our understanding right here?
There's the first tension between the brothers.
Okay,
One
we'll get
was-
there. There's no tension yet. We're going to get there in 1 second. But what's important?
One was accepted and one wasn't.
Chosenness. Does chosenness in Tanakh come with an explanation? No, it doesn't here. Okay, it doesn't when Abraham is introduced. It doesn't, we don't know why God chooses Yitzchak over Ishmael or Yaakov over Esav. None of them did anything wrong. And none of the ones that were chosen before birth did anything right because they weren't even born yet. Okay, one of the things that we're going to have to sort of almost accept as one of Tanakh's, we could call it ground rules, is that there is a sense, there is a notion of chosenness, and that chosenness is not explained. Okay, that's a really important point. Okay, now we're going to talk about all the implications of that later on, right? What does chosenness mean? And is it just a sort of merit, or is it a responsibility? And what does that mean for us? And we're going to get to all of that. Right now, we're talking about the paradigmatic other with a capital O. You have 2 boys, right? 2 of the second generation, different vocations. One is chosen and one is simply not chosen. Okay, now the story continues and it says, Vayomer Hashem el Kayin, pasuk vav, Lama kara lecha ve'lama naflu panecha. Right now, Hashem's question would be a little, right, wouldn't make sense unless we read the continuation of it, right? If it were an actual question, we would say, all due respect, God, you don't know why he's upset. He just brought you a korban, his brother copied him, and you took the brothers and not his. But it's not actually a question. It's a rhetorical question because the pasuk continues, and Hashem says, Halo im tetiv se'et, ve'im lo tetiv lapetach chatat rovetz, ve'elechat shukato ve'atat imsholbo. Okay, now this pasuk is what we're going to be spending the bulk of the class on because it's a pasuk that makes very, very, very little sense. But I actually read an article recently by Hans Christoph Oren that I think is actually a brilliant read on the psukim. It's not the only read on the psukim, it goes without saying, but it's something I want to introduce to you today because I think it really is very, very much in line with what we're going to be doing in this course. Okay, so the pasuk says as follows. Anyone want to take a stab at what Hashem is saying to him? Someone just take a step. And you could say the midrashim or the mifarshim that you're familiar with. I'll let you. What does he say? What's Hashem saying to him? And I'm going to play devil's advocate. So say what you're thinking, and I'm going to sort of
That
push
Kayin
back.
has a choice.
Okay, what's his choice?
He can do right or he can do not right.
Okay, meaning?
He can take out his frustration on his brother, or he could, live with it.
Okay, so where do you see that in the psukim? Haloim tetiv.
Lapetach etat rovetz.
Right, what does that mean?
Sin is crouching at the door.
Okay, right, so that's what right, crouching. And when you hear the word crouching, what do we imagine? And this is what a lot of the midrashim talk about, right? That the sin is crouching, and a lot of, right, beginning in the Second Temple period, we talk about Yetzer Hara and the lure of sin and how sin almost takes on this sort of, entity in and of itself, and it tries to drag us down with it, and the two, right, the Yetzer Hara on each shoulder. But what do we, and crouching, which we're going to see in 1 second, doesn't mean what we think it means. Yeah.
Doesn't he say you have a choice? If you choose, sin, if you choose otherwise, you will be choosing sin. And if you choose, to bring me again a better korbanot,
Okay, so wait, I'm pausing you right there. I'm pausing
Yeah.
you right there because you're already inferring that the problem is that Cain's korban wasn't good enough. There's no indication that his korban was not good enough. Again, when we try to come up with explanations for why God chooses, we're trying to insert something into the text that's intentionally not there,
Well,
right?
when he says that, when he doesn't accept it, and
Mhm.
he says, you know, look in front of you, you can be sinning.
Where?
Oh, I don't know where it is now. I don't know where it is, if it was in the commentaries or if it
So
was.
I think you're probably reading from La Petach Hatat Rovet, but that's what I want to sort of break down. Okay, so let's go back and see. Now, I'm gonna say at the outset, and right, Halo im tetiv cannot mean if you improve. Why? It can't mean if you're better, if you do tshuva, if you do better than you did last time. Why?
Because he
Because
hasn't,
Cain done anything
super wrong.
anything
He's saved.
wrong. Correct,
Saved.
right? We superimpose onto the story that he murders Hevel, but he didn't do anything wrong. He brought a mincha that was not accepted, and he was sad about it. That's it. He has not done anything wrong. So you can't say to someone who hasn't done anything wrong, listen, if you're better, he didn't do anything. Okay?
But
Now,
Hashem saw from his face that he was upset.
okay.
So he's at a crossroads. He could
Okay,
either act
100%. There's no, right, correct. There's no question that what Hashem is saying to Cain now is here's how here's how things work. Here's how they could potentially play out. That goes without saying, right? But my question is, how do we understand each set of words? We have haloim tetiv, se'et, v'im lo tetiv, la petach chatat, rovetz, which also makes no sense, right? Because chatatcha should be rovetz, right? Not say chatat, just. And what does that mean? There's just too many phrases that we loosely translate, but there's a lot of meat here in these psukim. Okay, so let's look inside and we're going to go one sort of phrase at a time. Okay, now go back a second. What did we say tov means in these early prakim in Breshit?
Fulfilling a purpose.
Okay, right? Natalie, we didn't say tov means do nice things and give tzedakah and keep Shabbos. There's no such thing. Get all of that out of our heads. By the way, we weren't even given the prohibition to murder, wasn't even introduced to humanity yet. We're going to get there next week, right? There's no prohibit. The only thing God says is pru or vumil. Oh, it's arts b'kipshua. That's the only thing we know. Okay, so tov, we said in Breshit, is if you fulfill your purpose, if you are able to fulfill that which you were created to do. Okay, now. Let's halo im tetiv. So Hashem is saying to Cain, if you can do tov, right? Tov not being nice, tov meaning fulfilling, like Natalie just said, that which you were created to do, right? Go back last week, we talked about the tov of the waters above and the waters below, and they were only tov when they were separated from the dry land. Halo im tetiv, se'et. What's se'et? What's last se'et?
Yael, I'm sorry. Can you just tell me what pasuk and what parak?
We're in Parak Dalid Pasuk Zayin, chapter 4, verse 7, and we're going to be here for a while.
Thank you.
Halo im tetiv. If you can do that which you were created to do, okay, you are a farmer. If you can sustain your family on your own, if you can do tetiv, if you can be a farmer and that's on your own, that's enough, say. You can carry, what's he carrying? What's Cain carrying? Go back to Vayhi miketz yamim. What does Cain feel that he is carrying or bearing the burden of on his own?
maybe the weight of his father's job.
Correct, right? Sustaining humanity, right? Kipshuha, working the land and mastering the earth and being able to provide. If you can, im tetiv, if you can do tov, se'eh, carry it on your own, right? Go you. Im lo tetiv. But if not, then what?
Be in control of it.
What?
Be in control of it. Be mad.
Okay,
Be
so-
able to control your weakness.
Okay, so excellent. So everyone is saying that because the terrible English translation is that the sin is crouching at the door, misleads all of us, okay? What does the word rovet mean? We think the word rovet means crouching with the implication of I'm about to pounce, right? So we're imagining that like the chatat, right? That little evil demon that we're picturing is sitting at the gate of the Ohel waiting to sort of pounce on Cain and you know, sort of lure him into. what is rovetz? And there's many examples of it in Tanakh. I'm bringing one pasuk because I think most of you are probably familiar with it, and also because it's good these days to read the psukim like this, okay? Yishayahu, Parakid Aleph, pasuk vav, okay, says as follows. This is in one of the Nebuot Nechama, when Yeshayahu is talking about what the world will look like one day, right? And the metaphors for all the different nations, obviously. But it says in Pasuk Vav, V'gar ze'ev im keves, right? The very famous, the wolf will lie with the lamb. V'namer im gedi yirbas, ve'egel ukfir umeri, yachdav, v'na'ar katon lo hegba. Okay. So it's talking about, it's describing all these animals living in harmony. No animal is scared of the other anymore because the idea of predator and prey no longer exists, right? Which again, Bigadol, the metaphor for different nations, hopefully speedily in our day, right? You have this metaphor of the different nations living side by side, and the animosity and the sort of hierarchy that was threatening, that used to exist, no longer does. Okay, so what is the word there, yirbat? Does it mean to be ready to pounce?
Well, it's characterizing sin as a wild animal, as a lion, because it's animals who crouch and attack.
But it's right, but that's the point, right? These animals are no longer crouching. So what are they doing? The
Oh,
namer in gedi yirbat means
They're hanging out together.
they're crouching in a
Doesn't mean
very
lying
relaxed.
down.
Correct, right? Crouching doesn't have to mean crouching with the intent to then pounce. They're crouching in the sense that they're lying down. Namer and Gadir Bat, they're relaxed. They're no longer scared. They're coexisting, right? Coexistence is, you don't get a better depiction of coexistence than this pasuk in Yeshayahu. Okay, so now go back to our pasuk in Breshit. It says lapet, and I'm going to hold lapet chatat. But if you can do this, right? Im tetiv se'et. If you could be told on your own, se'et, carry it. Okay. Ve'im lo tetiv, and Hashem goes on, lapetach chatat. Okay. And then it says rovetz. And if you could do that, you'll be able to lie down, just like the wolf will lie with the lamb. Then you'll be able to take a load off. Then you'll be able to relax. So what's lapetach chatat? It's not this image of like sin as an entity in and of itself is a much later concept in Tanakh, or not even in Tanakh, in Judaism. Okay, what is this idea of lapetach chatat? So I'm going to give you again a couple of different examples where I think the scholar whose article I'm basing this whole class on sort of ties it in, and I think it's a very, very compelling argument. Okay. Go first to Vayikra, Parak Daled.
Yael, can you give us either a copy of the article or a citation?
Yeah, his name is Hans Christoph Oren. The last name is A-U-R-I-N. A-U-R-I-N.
And what's his first name? Hans
Christoph, yeah.
Christoph.
Yeah. And if you're not able to get it on Google, then just email me through or let the office email me and I'll get you a copy.
What's the name of his article?
I don't remember the title exactly. I can get it to you after class if you need.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Everyone go quickly to Vayikra Parak Daled, Leviticus 4 for 1 second. Okay. And what we have here is the depiction of what happens when someone has to bring a chatat. Okay. When there's a failure, when there's a kishalon within the community. What do you do? So it says as follows. I'm starting in Pasuk Yud Gimel. Okay. It says V'im kol adat Yisrael yishku v'ne'elam davar me'inei hakahal v'asu achat mikol mitzvot Hashem asher lo te'asena. Right, and they do now mitzvah. Right, meaning it's the mitzvah lo ta'aseh. If they're over on something that they weren't supposed to do, ve'ashemu, and they're found right. They're guilty of doing something not right. V'nod'a hachatat asher chatu aleha. V'hikrivu hakahal par ben bakar lachatat, v'heviu oto lifnei ohel moed. Right? You don't go in the middle of the night and whisper to the Kohen, I did this thing wrong. Can you just help me do kapara? Okay? It's a public tekef, so to speak. They bring it out lifnei ohel moed And in front of everyone, v'samchu ziknei ha'idat yidehem al rosh hapar lifnei Hashem, v'shachat et hapar lifnei Hashem, and then v'hivi hakohen hamushiach midam. It's a whole public ceremony where the people that failed, okay, that made a mistake, publicly declare by bringing the sin offering in front of the Ohel Moed. Okay, I'll give you another example of this sort of phenomenon that I do think the Torah is alluding to here. Okay, go to Tehillim, Perek Lamed Bet. It's Psalms 32. Okay, I'm going to read you just from Pasuk Gimel and on. Okay, Ki hechareshti baluat samai v'sha'agati kol hayom ki omam v'layla tichbad alay yadecha nehapach l'shadi v'charvonei kayitzela. This is again, I'm not going to waste too much time sort of picking out each word here, but the experience or the emotions that are being conveyed here by the Mishorer is that the burden, the suffering, the sorrow that he's experiencing is heavy. It's weighing on him. Chatat yamim pasukei odiacha ve'avoni lo chisiti amarti ode alei psha'ai laHashem ve'ata nasata avon chatati selah. Okay, which is very similar to what we see here, right? Lapeta chatat, the whole idea of se'et. So what does that mean? What
Which
is he
Perek in
saying?
Tehillim is this?
Lamed Bet 32. He's saying he can't bear the burden of his sins alone. So he's bringing it out publicly. He's declaring it to Hashem and what? Letting Hashem.
Yeah.
He's letting Hashem bear it with him, right? All of these ideas, and the same goes for sin and the same goes for burden. You don't have to bear it alone, Hashem is saying, right? The whole point of creating humanity and creating more than one person is that there's a sharing of the burden of sin, of failure, of the inability to be tov. I'll read you just one other quick example from Eov. Okay, Eov Perek Yud Aleph. And in Pasuk Yud Daled, verse 14. Okay, and it's such a beautiful pasuk. He says, "Im aven biadcha harchikehu." Right? If you have an aven, just push it away. Push it, meaning far away from you. The al tashkein ba'ohalecha avla. Don't keep it dwelling inside your own personal tent. If something is wrong, bring it out. Bring it out to the public, because then why? Why do we bring it out? Why do we take it to the opening? Why do we bring it to Ohel Moed? And again, we have to get back into the mindset of tribal living. Okay, we're not postmodern man who tries to pretend that he's perfect to the world because everyone's own individual shame is what's important. This is about tribal living. And what happens when you're living tribally? Someone does something not right. Someone is confronted with difficulties. What does he do? He doesn't hole up in a house by himself, because that's not an option. What does he do?
He shares it.
Is it?
He shares it, right? He admits the mistakes, the failures, the inability to be told, to do what he knows he was created to do. He admits both to himself and to others in order for others to do two things: to forgive him and to help him, right? That's what community is, the Torah is saying. That's what living with other human beings is about. Okay, if you think about it, the metaphor on some level, we talk about the arta harami kirbecha, right? It's not just to get rid of it, it's to bring it mikirbecha, to bring it out into the public, because only then, only by admitting publicly what one has done, or by admitting publicly one's own failures, can they be helped out by the community. Okay, so now let's go back to our pasuk in Perek Dalet. Okay, Halo im tetiv, Hashem is saying, se'et. You could do it on your own, Kayin, if you could carry the burden of this arur of the land, go for it. Se'et. Ve'im lo tetiv. But if you can't, lapetach chatat. What does that mean? Bring it out to the petach. Right? Chatat symbolically from the korban. Bring it out so that other people know. The other human, if you're the Oved Adama, the Ro'et Zon is not going to know you need help, and he's not going to know you can't carry this burden unless you bring it to the Petach. Once you bring it to the Petach, Ro'et, you could then lie down. You could take a load off because you're sharing this burden. Okay, but then, okay, so I'm gonna, the first portion of the pasuk is very, very clear. What's the first portion of the pasuk? If you had to say in one word, what is it? What is it in one word? Right?
Oh.
It's not literally the chatat, but it has that cultic ring to it, which fits in this story about bringing a mincha. What's the first portion of the pasuk about? Again, it's not about Cain and Hevel. It's about humanity. What is God saying to humanity?
It's in your hands.
Share.
It's in your hands, but more importantly,
We shared.
share, right? Community, shared responsibility, cooperation. Hashem is essentially saying you have an oved adama and you have a roetzon, cooperate. If it's getting too much for you, and that's why you're bringing a mincha, because you're waiting for, the curse is not ending. The land will always be hard to work, and providing for the people you love will always be difficult. So share the burden. Okay. Now, here's the big but. Okay, and this I'm going to also, you're going to need to be patient because it's going to be based on other psukim in these prakim as well. Okay, the big but is Hashem says, "Ve'elecha teshukato ve'ata timshol." What does that mean? But if what? If who's against you? If what's against? What does that mean? What's the tshuka? What's the? Oh yay! They let me share my screen. Hold on, I'm putting up a source page. Okay. So there's two things we need to know, two rules of dikduk that I'm going to have to remind you of here. Okay, and then we're going to see why it's important for our psukim. Okay, usually when we think of a vav, we think of an and, right? You have Kayin vehevel, Kayin and Hevel. Okay, sometimes vav could mean the opposite, right? We have vav hayipuch, right? So it could mean something and its opposite. But the vav as a conditional clause is also a really important grammatical tool. Okay, so just look, for example, source 2 says in Shoftim Parak Vav, okay, Gidon is talking to the Malach Hashem, and he says, "V'yesh Hashem imanu," right? God is really with us, right? Or sorry, I'll say it like this: V'yesh Hashem imanu, right? If God were really with us, it's conditional. V'lama matzatnu kol zot. If God were really with us, why are we suffering like this? That's what Gidon says to the Malach. Okay, if you look in Parak Vav, in Shmuel, the very next one right down below that, right? It says, Vayomer Shmuel, Echelecha. Shmuel is saying to God, how am I going to go? Vishama Shaul, if Shaul hears me, Viharaguni, he's going to kill me. Okay, and we have a bunch of different examples of that. So that's the first grammatical rule you need to remember is Vav doesn't always mean and, sometimes it means in the case of, right? On the condition of, if, right? It's basically if. Vav is if. Okay, now, second grammatical thing we need to remember is that el, okay, which we usually think means towards or in the direction of, right? Vayelach el hamakom, sometimes also means, right, something to work in opposition to or to be hostile to. So look, for example, Shmot Parak Yudalet, right? It says, Vayeyafech levav paro ve'avadav el ha'am. Right, the heart of Paro and his avadim turns against Bnei Yisrael. It was in opposition to. There was an animosity, a hostility between them. Vayelech Yehuda el haKnani hayoshev b'Chevron. Yehuda wasn't going to Knani. He went up to fight them. It was a war. Okay. Same thing. Vayasar el hamalach. He was fighting with the angel. Okay. So now we're going to pause with our pasuk. And we're going back to the curses, the arurim of Adam and Chava. Okay. Each one we said in the very beginning of this class, we said each arur, okay, had two components. There was the descriptive component of this is the new reality, or this is the new sort of reality that you are going to be living within, and it's described, right? The serpent is going to be the lowest of the animals. The woman will have pain in childbirth, and the man is going to have to work hard for what he has, okay? Or he won't have this. He will be a hard worker, okay? We'll say that. Now, the second part of every arur, okay, I have it here broken down: serpent, woman, man, is that the relationship which we mentioned in the beginning of the pasuk. But the vav here is conditional. It's not saying it's always going to be horrible between snakes and all the other living things on the earth. But it says, right, you're going to be the lowest of the animals. And there, right under where it says serpent, Pasuk Tedvav, ve'eva ashtit beincha uvein ha'isha. And on the condition, or if that animosity sort of surfaces, so then you're going to bite his ankle and he's going to try to stamp on your head. Okay. The same thing with man. Man, it goes without saying, right? That it's going to be very, very difficult. That's the new reality. And the pasuk yurchet over there under man, the kot v'dardar tatzliach lach, if, right, or when, if really, if these thorns and thistles grow instead of, right, v'achalta et esav hasadeh, you are going to be sweating to get every tiny bit of wheat and barley out of the ground that you can. Okay. Now go back to the woman. Okay. Pain in childbirth. That's the new reality. But then it says, Ve'el ishech t'shukatech vehu yimshol bach. And if, what's chukah? This is one of those psukim that, again, gets very, very misinterpreted. We gave one interpretation last year in my women's class. I'm going to offer something a little bit different here today also. Okay. If we said el doesn't always mean towards, what if el is in opposition to? Okay. The el ishech t'shukatech. What does that mean, shukatech? What's chukah? What's
It's
chukah?
usually translated as desire, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Right. But here, if el, we're saying we're interpreting not if your desire is for your husband and he's going to rule over you. Okay. It's saying the el ishech t'shukatech. If your shukah, if what you desire is against your husband, goes against what your husband should either want or do, hu yimshol bach, he will say no, right? He's not going to necessarily do what you tell him to do. What does this remind you of? I'm going to read you a pasuk, right? First of all, where do we see desire in these early prakim? Did anyone desire so far in Breshit?
There's a ta'ava with the woman and the fruit, right?
Okay, excellent, right? I'm going back one parak to parak Gimel. The only time there's any inclination of any sort of desire reads as follows. Vatera ha'isha, and again, I'm telling you the reason we're connecting these psukim is because every curse relates back to the relationship as it was soiled, right? The relationship was affected when X happens, and so the outcome is Y, okay? So now look at what happens between male and female. Pasuk Vav, I'm in Perek Gimel, chapter 3, we went one chapter back, okay? Vatera ha'isha, kitov ha'etz lema'achal, v'chi ta'ava hi hu le'einayim, v'nechmad ha'etz lehaskil, right? You don't get a better depiction of desire than this pasuk, all the different reasons she was desiring, and what does she do? Vatikach mipirio vatochal. She ate from it, but it doesn't stop there. Vatitein gam leisha ima vayochal. Now, many people have asked, right? Even in other classes where we've looked at this parak, like, why is he so passive? She's sitting there having this reflective conversation with the Nachash, and she's back and forth and questioning her own assumptions and thinking and analyzing. And she's like, here, Adam, and he's like, oh, and he just bites the fruit. So what? But now go back to the next parak. That's going to be the redefinition of their relationship. It's almost like a tikkun of sorts. Ve'el ishech t'shukatech, when what you desire is el ishech, is against your husband, right? The way people go out, the el in war. Vehu yimshol bach, right? He will say no. He's not just going to take what you give him. There's almost like the balance is being restored. She was the first one to speak and to reflect and to think. And she was in many ways in that story, right? Sort of moshelet, so to speak. And the balance is being restored here because Hashem is saying, if what she wants is, if what the woman wants is el ishech, he's going to say no, okay? Or he should say no, or he can say no, Okay, and again, this is not just about male and female. This is not a gender thing. This is about how two Ezer Kenegdos interact. The point of being an Ezer Kenegdo is that they are supposed to come together to fulfill a common purpose. But if one is right, if one is almost standing in opposition to the other, then that whole model falls apart. Okay. Now let's go back into our pasuk where Hashem is speaking to Cain, and you're going to tell me what the second half of the pasuk is about. Okay. Hashem says to Cain, the first half of the pasuk is Cain, rely on other people. That's why more than one person was created at a time. Halo im teitiv, if you could do it on your own, se'et. Ve'im lo teitiv, you cannot do what you were created to do, what your vocation, what you need to fulfill. La petach hatat, bring it out to the petach. That will lead you to rovet, able to take a load off. You don't have to shoulder every burden alone. Okay. But, and now someone is going to explain to me the big but here. Ve'elecha teshukato, ve'atatim sholbo. In this pasuk are the two fundamentals of what it means to coexist or to exist as human beings on this world. What is it saying? First is cooperation when you need it. And what's the second? Wait, hold on. Rena, I can't hear you. Wait, I'm unmuting you. Hold on, I can't hear you. Can I unmute people?
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
If you share it, then you can be against your desire or your need to do something bad, and you can control it.
Right. So say it even more in the context of the parallel to Chava, right? What's meaning if you can cooperate, but right, the vav is the if. If elecha teshukato, right, cooperate. That's how you survive. But if elecha teshukato, if what he, your counterpart, your potential partner wants is elecha, is something that is bad for you or against you or not in your best interest and not bringing you closer to lehetiv, then what? What is your responsibility? Just as much as knowing how to ask for help, just as much as your responsibility to
stand your ground.
Be'atatim sholbo, right? Then you have to say no. Okay. And again, it goes back, it parallels the language used by Adam and Chava, because on some level there's a similarity, but here it's in a very, very different context. There's been a realignment of things since the very beginning of Breshit. Okay, that's what those curses are all about. But here Hashem is saying something else. Here Hashem is saying there's a farmer and there's a shepherd. And in order for humanity to be able to do tov in this world, there are times where they are going to have to rely on each other, where the farmer and the shepherd are going to have to come together. And it's on the farmer to admit when he needs the shepherd's help. And it's on the shepherd to come and help him laseh, help him carry that burden. Same way God carries the burden of the mishorer, and the way the community bears the burden of the chatat that the individual or the group of people bring out to the petach, because no individual can exist in a vacuum. But at the same time, the Torah is also making very clear there are boundaries to cooperation. And it's also, the onus is also on you to ensure that your counterpart or your partner shares in your vision, shares in your understanding of what Tov is. But as soon as a lecha teshukato, as soon as the desire of your potential partner stands in opposition to what you believe you're meant to do in this world, v'atatim sholbo. That's it. Then that's where you draw the line. Okay. So again, this is only one reading of this pasuk, and I think that there's a lot of different ways to understand this pasuk. But I think that at the very, very outset, like I mentioned, at the very outset of humanity, I think that there are some very, very important concepts being sort of put out there. And I think the very first one is about coexistence. And there are no simpler rules for coexistence than that. Partner when you can and when you need to, but don't lose sight of who you are and don't lose sight of what you're meant to do on this earth just because you have someone who says that they can share the burden, right? And I think, again, it is so basic and so simple. It's almost like we're breaking down these concepts into their most like basic components. But I think that the very, very beginning of humanity, that's what it's all about, right? Breshit is not about people called Adam, Cain, and Hevel. right? It's not about people called Adam and Chava. It's about the paradigm, the first generation of humanity, of male and female, the second generation of children of, and what do we take from our fathers and how do we branch out beyond that? And as we're going to see next week, one of the things that we're going to notice next week is that, in fact, no spoilers here, right? You all know what happens. Cain doesn't actually internalize God's message. Okay, Cain actually refuses to have a partner. And rather than seeing a potential partner and someone who could alleviate the burden, Cain wants to do away with him, and Cain gets rid of him. Okay, and then the question is, then what's the aftermath of that? And what happens in this world when one human being tries to get rid of another human being because he sees him as competition for God's favor rather than as a potential partner on this earth? Okay, and that's what we're going to be moving towards next week. And by the way, this is all before law is even introduced. Okay, so we're going to get the law a little bit later, but this is all before law is even introduced. These are the very, very basic, I would say, urges or sort of very, very the basic makeup of humanity is in these early prakim, and that's really what we're trying to sort of keep an eye out for without superimposing all of our later dogma and later concepts of good and evil and everything else that arises later on in Tanakh. Okay. I wanted to leave time for questions because I feel like on Zoom people are a little more hesitant to speak up. So please, I left time on purpose. So please ask questions now. You could take yourselves off speaker. Questions, thoughts, anything unclear? No? Nothing?
I have a question,
Yeah.
more a thought.
Okay.
It's a bit of a darker thought. Like
So
it's very beautiful.
We're all in a dark place, so
Yeah. No, and maybe it's something that is addressed later on through the course, but when I think about all the characters throughout Bereshit, and just from the very beginning, there's this idea of good and bad, and is Hashem trying to create this world that there are good and bad, that there are enemies, and that's something that has to exist throughout this world in order for there to be like nations, Migdal Bavel.
Exactly. So I was going to say, hold that question till we get a little bit further in. The short answer is yes. The short answer is God does not want this world to be homogeneous, and humanity is not, I think, right? And again, I don't want to, give too much away because we're going to get to it. But I do think there are meant to be different ways of being. I think there's meant to be diversity. The question is, what does that diversity look like, and where are the lines drawn, and what's expected of the people that are not chosen, and what's our relationship meant to look like with them, and what is that, right? Does chosen and not chosen translate as good and evil? I don't think so. But how do we understand that, and how do we understand the nature of the other vis-a-vis ourselves, believing that we are the ones that were chosen? All of those are really, really important questions, and it plays a lot into, as we're going to see, sort of these stereotypes of the other. Right, we're going to see already hopefully in the next class that already we're splitting off into Canaan and Ham and all the sort of descendants of these sons who were they and what's their ideology, and all of these ideologies are also hints to sort of how we map out the world and how we understand character traits of different groups of people and how that helps us ultimately understand ourselves. So, again, we're going to be answering all those questions. Everything you said is really, really important, and we're going to hopefully be getting to it. I'm just trying to sort of build.
Yeah, I guess it's more like using Cain as an example of how to be in maybe this world that God's created.
Correct. Cain was one of the things that I think in most of these prakim is sort of like, this is the hypothetical, and how does it play out? And how does the way that hypothetical played out help us understand the reality in which we live? That's what these stories are really about, right? It's not about the individual named Cain who lived once upon a time and what happened to him, right? It's not what happened. It's what always happened, right? The Tanakh is about what always happened. That's the bottom line. So when we're studying these stories, we're studying it to understand ourselves as much as we are to understand what, right, hypothetically happened whenever the beginning of humanity was. So yes, Cain is the hypothetical. This is the choice you could have made. This is the choice you made instead. Why, and what are the repercussions of that choice if that choice is made?
We started off by saying that Cain was his father, right? He was his father's things. But how do you then how can you, from how you're interpreting it now, so how would you put this sort of interpretation on eating of the apple or whatever it was, okay, between Adam and Eve, because it appears to be the other way around.
In
That
what
Eve
way?
is, well, that Eve is the one who is the stronger of the two. And I'm trying to work out how
So
you
in that case, right? So you're talking about the two klalot, the way that they
Yeah,
have the parallel
yeah,
language.
yeah,
So
yeah.
in that case, again, going back, we didn't say what they did was wrong, but in that
I'm not
case,
talking
right?
in terms of wrong. What I'm trying
Right.
to say
So
is
the parallel is as follows. Tell me if this makes sense, right? Parallel is that when Hashem is talking about, he's saying the new reality, Chava, is that you are going to have pain in childbirth. Good. And then the next reality in all the klalot, it works like this. The first is the mahut of the being that's been affected. And then the next is the relationship between that being and the being with which it interacted. So the way that new relationship is going to look is that if Chava, if the female, right, again, the male, female, if the female desires something that is a lecha to the man, this time around, right, the man is not just going to eat what she gives him. He's going to moshel ba. Okay, so the same is in the case of the partnership between, right, whatever hypothetical partnerships exist in humanity. You should partner. You should share the burden of being human and being tov, but ve'elecha teshukato. But if that potential partner is actually trying, or his interests sort of, conflict with what you define as tov and what your, whatever your space is that you're supposed to fill in the world, viatatim sholbo, then you, right? Moshel doesn't mean to rule over. It almost means to sort of supersede them or suppress, right? What they're trying to get you to do. Does that make sense?
yes, because it's a question of definition of how you define whatever you're discussing between the two, how
Correct.
you define it. Yeah.
And again, moshel, because moshel is more about, it's less about like ruling, it's more about authority, right? Because when, like, for example, in contrast, right, when it talks about Adam and versus the other animals, it says urdu bidgatayam, right? There's no question that in the chain of command, humans urdu over the fish, right? It doesn't use urdu. It says vatatim sholbo, that you restore that balance of authority. It's more about authority rather than ruling over something in this sort of very physical sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Again, this is just one reading, but I think it's really a compelling reading. And I think it really sort of, again, tips off what we're going to be doing in this course as it ensues. I think some of these very, very, very basic building blocks are what we need to look at initially. And then we're gonna build from there and get into the topic of Am Yisrael, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have a WhatsApp or something where we could ask questions or?
Yeah, I have. You can write down my number.
Okay.
I'm just warning you, I am on so many frenetic WhatsApp groups these days, but if I miss it, it just means I'm trying to respond to I think we all are.
Okay.
058 780 1022.
And I really would like, if you could find the citations for the article.
No problem. Oh, someone actually, hold on, because in the chat, John Miriam Bloomberg actually just wrote the title. New interpretation in German. No, it should be in English. So if she can't find, I'll get it in English. If she can't find it, not a problem.
Okay, great. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yael, is there a recording of this that we could review it?
That would have to, the office would. know,
Yes,
I think
it's
so.
being recorded.
It's being
All
recorded
right.
Where is the recording available?
Hate when it's recorded.
on the site. On the site, you have to go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Wait, one more question. Yeah, Chava.
Post the source sheets on the Matan site?
Yeah, do you need these sort? I broke, it's really just the psukim, but if you want, I can post them on the site.
Yeah, I would find it very helpful.
Okay, no problem. So I'll send them to the office right now.
Me too.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you very
no
much.
problem. I'm sending them right now. All right. Sorot Tovot, everybody. Stay safe.
Yes.
We're davening for everybody. Extended everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keeps me sane.
Same here.
Thanks, Yael.